Okay, hi there folks, coming up to the top of the hour, and welcome and thank you for joining us today at Building Trust into Your Data. I am Hayden McCall. If I flick this little screen over, you will see a picture, and I'll moderate the session today with the panelists. Just a quick bit of housekeeping before we get into it. The session is recorded today. Sort of frequent question people ask is, will we get the recording? Yes, you will. That'll be emailed as a link to you tomorrow, so you can watch that or share that to colleagues who you think will be interested in the content. Very keen to hear from the audience today. We've got time at the end for questions and have the panelists available for answers. So just click on the Q&A button down in your little Zoom control panel, bring that up, type the questions. Feel free to do that as we go. We'll try and address them, or we'll address them in the context of the conversation. We'll also come to them if we need to you, and if you want specific, indicate to you at that stage. We'll wrap up within the hour, and that's about it. So we're running through 9 questions. Each of the questions will go to the panelists, and I will introduce them right now. So we have with us in the room, and you will see on the thumbnail down the side if you've got it set up that way, Jason, Mike, Anne Marie, and we did have Addy in sort of the wings to help out with Anne Marie, but she's comfortable pushing through today without Addy. So yeah, just the 3 of us as per the invitations that you've all received. Okay, so just to sort of frame up the conversation around data and the importance of data, we pulled out some recent, very recent IDC research. In fact, this was from a webinar last week. And it highlighted just our, I guess, emphasised the importance of data in the whole digital transformation move, and it came up as number 4 in terms of priorities. Now I'm going to go through the detail of this, but essentially what they're saying is that across ANZ CEOs, this was Australian data, but New Zealand was similar. Data and data monetisation very high on CEOs' radar based on CEO 2019. Predictions for digital transformation. Now I'll send you a link to that webinar in the follow-up email as well, so you can go in and drill into these slides. There's a couple more here. So 73% was just how high data management was as a priority, and I guess for CEOs they want to see how they're going to pay for it as well. So data monetization was up there as well, and some tips there in terms of what organisations need to be thinking about. I won't go through those because you'll have plenty out of today's content to be ripping into. All right, so let's get into the questions. As I say, 9 to get through, so we've got 3 to 4 minutes on each one. Sorry, bouncing around on that one. So first one, posing this to Jason to just help frame up the conversation around data governance, and I guess how that flows through into building trust into your data. Jason, over to you.
Yep. Okay, great. Thank you, Hayden. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Data governance. Data governance means lots of things, different things to different people, but I will describe what it means to me. I think its most important function is decision making, to enable continuous decision making efficiently to create effective operations. Are you able to make a decision if some of the people are missing? If there's some changes in the organization, do you still have the ability to make decisions about the data? If there's an issue with privacy or security, do you know how to make decisions about that data? That's what I think data governance is all about. If you look at Gartner best practice for EIM best practices, governance comes out as the 3rd pillar for best practices, and it's there underneath mission and vision and strategy. So it's there to guide the pursuit of business objectives through the pursuit of the following of the business strategy towards this vision. That's what the purpose of governance is. For data governance, if you take a look at what the Institute for Governance or Data Governance talks about, information governance, they'll talk about information governance being at a very, very high level, and then IT governance being below that, and data governance being a subset of IT governance, and that's where it sits.
Yeah, big pictures. And Mike, I saw that you'd done a bit of an article on LinkedIn yesterday just talking about this, so maybe a couple of points that you want to make on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jason raises some good points, and I think from our point of view, data governance covers a wide variety of things, but often data governance becomes synonymous, possibly accidentally, maybe on purpose, with risk avoidance or preventing data breaches.
Yeah, I
You
word
know,
right. You know,
yep.
it always puts it under that category.
Or it
Yep.
might become like a prioritization process to say what kind of data work should we be doing now. And I do agree with Jason. It's much more about what are the things you need to do to your data in order to make use of it, good decisions based on it. And that encompasses a whole lot of stuff, not just security or prioritization.
And you know, I guess the IDC really reinforces digital transformation is high on the radar, but to achieve digital transformation without good data governance is probably you know, paddling a boat up a stream that has a large hole in its keel. All right, great, Anne-Marie. Anything else that you want to bring into the context at this stage?
No, I think that's well covered there. Thanks, Hayden.
Yeah,
I might add one more thing if I can real quickly, Hayden, on the governance. To reemphasize, a lot of times people think governance, they think straight to security, but it really depends on the organization. Some larger organizations might have risk management teams that will take on data security underneath their jurisdiction. And some chief data officers, for instance, their goal is to achieve business objectives, not necessarily the security of the data. So it depends on different organizations, but being really clear about what the scope or the roles are, and perhaps maybe when you design the governance to design decision making, you take that into the context about who gets decision rights and roles and accountabilities and responsibilities.
yeah, good stuff. Okay, on to the second question then. We talk a little, you know, a lot of mention in sort of IT circles, I suppose, around system of record. Sorry, I realised I've just pointed this to Addy, but where it says Addy, I mean Anne-Marie. System of record versus the other ancillary systems that are around that system of record. So I guess you've got the ERP solution, you know, potentially as your system of record. Other systems, how is data handling between those systems, and how does that work, Anne-Marie?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the system of record is the main source of truth for an organisation. Really critical that an organisation has a system of record to protect the integrity of their data. A typical organisation will have many ancillary disparate systems they're using to manage their operations. These systems are typically required to extract and feed information into a master system that in turn is relied upon to host and manage that data effectively. Also important that master system is also relied on to provide up-to-date and accurate information, both out to those ancillary systems and to users. Without a system of record, there is no single system that will have a complete data set. Bits and pieces of the required data will then be stored in disparate systems that can't be easily stitched together to make a complete, meaningful data set. In some of those instances, these ancillary systems will hold the same data with the same attributes. However, in some instances, these data values can be different. And when that happens, an organization really can't be sure which among them is accurate. So in many corporate environments, we see the ERP system being used as that system of record. It's really critical that that ERP system is compatible with all of the best of breed ancillary systems the organization needs to be competitive. Often these systems are not developed and built on technology that's agnostic in its compatibility. Therefore, the ERP is really relied on to ensure that not only can those systems be integrated, but the data that's being exchanged between them can be translated effectively.
Yeah.
Without a system
and I guess, sorry to interrupt, I guess when we talk data governance, what we're doing is establishing the rules that create that language and the interventions that need to happen between the ancillary systems and your system of record to make sure that your business rules are contained.
I think
guys, happy for you to see something that's okay. But from your perspective, in terms of other scenarios you see where maybe the ERP isn't the system of record, but you've still got to control data quality and the flow of data across your organization.
Absolutely, Hayden. And I think, it's that having that source of truth, ensuring that your systems aren't architected to perform in silos. When that happens, you're delivering a very suboptimal solution back to your business, and the credibility that your data holds will erode through the users that are in turn extracting this information to make informed decisions.
All right, good stuff. Guys, anything else to add?
Just sometimes it's not always just about a system of records. Sometimes where like if you think about a customer name and address and phone numbers of the different customer details, some of those details might be scattered across different systems, and that's where the master data management comes into play.
Yeah, and off the back of Jason's point there, I think on a data governance point of view, and even sort of what we're talking about today, sometimes particularly IT professionals get a little bit mixed up between identity management, or validation, so proving that this is Mike and that's Hayden and that's Anne-Marie, and identity resolution, where actually you've got data in different places, possibly for very good reasons. Are you able to stitch that together? Because people change names, addresses, phone numbers, all that kind of stuff. So you can have totally valid data, which is in different places, but and you can manage that data really well, and we can be sure that when I'm signing on to my app, my balance is right and all that kind of good stuff. But unless you have a good identity resolution governance process, you're actually going to fail to deliver to your customer.
Explain that a little bit more. It's a new terminology to me. Right? So when what is an identity resolution?
So let's say I've got an easy name, Mike, but let's say I'm Michael Parsons in one system and Mike Parsons in another system. And where I've signed up, maybe you have a loyalty program that has a low barrier to entry. I can sign up for as many cards as I want, or enter as many competitions as I want, or whatever. It doesn't really matter what it is. When you go to say, well, what's our total relationship with Mike as a customer, then you have a problem. If all you're doing is managing those two identities to make sure that if I've got two separate app downloads or two separate relationships with you, those are valid, like I have access to the right information and I can transact with you properly. That's not the same as saying, how valuable is Mike across the scope of our business? Same thing in B2B. You might have hierarchies, right? Like you have a local business you're dealing with, but actually there's a national account or whatever. And you need good identity management to ensure you're talking to the right people and you have the right controls. But when you're doing analytics or you're trying to understand what decisions to make, you need good identity resolution approach to be able to say, actually, our national relationship with this customer is this. Or if you're a bank, yep, we know that you're this kind of a credit card customer, but actually you've got a home loan and you've got a savings account, and maybe those aren't exactly the same as far as customer information goes. So if you only have straight matching and you're only using one thing to join, like you're just picking email, well, people share email addresses. They change email addresses. So how are you dealing with that? Like, yes, it's fine to say, here's my email and here's my password, but customers, they're messy and dirty and ambiguous and gray. And so that's, I think, where some of your data governance principles start to come in, because it's dealing with that ambiguity. What are we going to do? Do we even have a way to approach this?
Excellent. That's good stuff. Okay, moving on to that's really, really helpful, I think, Mike. So third question, when the data is broken, and you've given some good examples there, but you've got a mishmash of identities for a customer, for example, what are the signs that you start to the problems that you have and suffer, and when you recognize it?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's the easiest way to know if your data is broken is to use it, to go try to do something with it. Anne-Marie touched on something before, which is, if there's lots of different data in different systems, you might all get together as, say, a management team, and everybody brings their own numbers to the table. And then the discussion isn't about, well, what sort of business decisions should we make? It's about whose numbers are right. And that's just crippling for the organization. But we've seen a lot of cases. I've got some quite, amusing things. Well, amusing when you see them, not so amusing for the organization. But like when you go to use the data, so you say, okay, well, we're going to restructure our customer pricing proposition. Cool. So where do we make our money? All right, well, one of the things that we would do is we'd pull out all the revenue for all our customers and all the profit for our customers, assuming you can calculate that, and then just plot them like revenue against profit, or activity against profit. Like how many calls do I make at a telco versus how much money am I spending with the telco? And a lot of the times, if you actually do that, you turn up a lot of weird stuff. Like we had one telco that, for some reason, when somebody built the database, they only thought, oh, we'll only ever have this many plans that are active. And so like a whole bunch of plans fell off the bottom, which meant when the billing system went to go, oh, okay, you've done this activity, I want to join it up to this plan to get a number I should charge you. There was no lookup, so they were getting all that for free. Almost every business that we've just pulled data out of systems, whether it's ERPs or other systems, and started blending it together and trying to go do something, you find really weird stuff. And ironically, a lot of the time business doesn't want to necessarily invest in that investigation, but I've yet to be involved in one of those investigations that didn't pay for itself in like under 30 days, like 5 times, 10 times, because all of a sudden you go, crap, we weren't even charging those people, or they were on the wrong plan, or somebody hit the wrong key and instead of it charging 8, it charged 7, and like that's, so I guess what I'm saying is, unless you're pulling it out of your systems and trying to do something with it, you won't know. So if you're just getting your reports and making decisions based on your reports, there's no cross-validation of any of that. So you've got to go do something with your data.
So you're getting this cross-tabulation of data and looking at it from one angle, but bring another dimension in, you start to see the outliers and the flags go up that you've got an issue here.
That's exactly right.
Okay, good stuff.
I'd like to add on that, if I may,
Sure.
Hayden. Another great way to find out if something's broken with the data is to ask the users or the customers of the data, how's it going? And ask them, is there anything wrong? Or, are you able to do all the things you want to do? Staying in touch with the stakeholders and sweeping across the organization and touching base with different departments, maybe attending their meetings as a guest and just say, hey, thank y'all for letting me come to your meeting. Just wanted a few minutes just to understand, is data an issue with you guys? Is everything going okay? And making those touch points across the organization is a great way to get a feel for it. Obviously, love to create a great mechanism for feedback in the organization. I've seen some bigger organizations that will create a standard email that says, hey, email us at data issues at the CDO, or info governance, whatever, at organization.com. All those kind of mechanisms, anything to open up the lines of communication will help.
What about going back to the customer themselves and saying, here's the data we have on you, check it.
More internal customers. Sorry, let me clarify. I was talking about internal customers. So when you've got an organization, whether small or large, touching base with each department saying, how's your data going? I've worked in organizations as small as 10 and as large as over 100,000. All organizations have some kind of departments, and there should be a representative you can speak to ask if there's any data issues that are inhibiting their procedures.
All right, good stuff. Okay, obvious next question is, okay, you've got bad data. How are you how do you theorize where the root cause analysis and where that problem is coming from? In drilling into, specific scenario pops up that what's the next step, Jason? What are your recommendations?
I always go straight back to the business and start back with the business process, because in many cases, bad data is bad data only in one perspective, but not in all perspectives. If you give a whole bunch of, if you got this fantastic geospatial data, when you give it to the finance department, they're going to think it's bad data. So it depends on the context for which the data is often used and if there's an error or not. So I like to go back to the business process. And when I think about data quality improvement, that is such a large span across the entire information lifecycle. There's many times I've come in where I'm overseeing the data strategy, and then there's like a knight in shining armor that comes in one part of the business and says, we got all these data issues, we're going to just come in and fix them. But they don't particularly understand that their sphere of control is limited across that information lifecycle. So when you say, how do you begin? I think I'd like to begin by having kind of an info map, or just kind of a picture of how does this data move through the system? Where does it get created? How does it evolve? Where does it get stored? And drawing a mud map to see how the information is flowing, and then saying, okay, where along this mud map are we detecting the issues, and where do we think those issues were created? For instance, if you have problems with all sorts of codings, A, B, and C is not equaling up to apples, bananas, and carrots, you're getting Q's and D's in there. Well, why? If you go back and look at the frontline systems, you might find it was a free text field, and you needed to change that so it was a drop-down menu. And you could have all the resources in the back end trying to scrub it you like, but if it's until you fix the free text field, you're not actually fixing the root cause. So that would be my best recommendation on that one. And then when you embark on these programs, you need to have a realistic expectation of what you can do and understand the resources you can do it. In small organizations, probably less of a deal, but when you're dealing with large organizations that have multi-million-dollar programs or projects, capital expenditures versus operational expenditures become very important. And with data quality improvement, that is an OpEx, not a CapEx. And you have to be very careful about how you plan to fund that. So data quality is more than just a technical fix. It's also a commercial and a business issue as well, and how you approach it.
And raises the point, is it an ongoing continuous improvement, or do you establish a project around it and assign a team and go hunting for this stuff?
You can put a project in place, but the longevity of the effects of that project will be only short-lived. If I was going to describe what I think Nirvana is to establish a continuous data quality improvement, migration, and integration team. Data migrations, data integrations, and data quality improvements are all integrated. And if you look at the way you have to do this and do the testing and the remediation of it, you would find that many of these processes overlap, and you can reduce costs greatly by combining these capabilities. Then if you put that under a constant data governance, then you just simply expand or contract that technical capability as the volume of work is. And then if the people who control the resources are in that data governance team, they can control the resource. You acquire some company, you got to integrate it, expand the data integration, data quality, data migration team. If you don't have much activity going on, then shrink it down. I think that's the wisest thing. But to take it down completely and then rebuild it again adds a lot of cost to the business, because there's always data quality improvement to be done.
And I guess it's an awareness of amongst your staff as the greatest stakeholders that can do something about it is when you see bad data, raise the flag, tell someone about it, do something about it, let your IT team know, whoever they might be, that this is going on. Don't just kind of wave over and go, which I think is probably human nature, right?
Yeah, and sometimes IT can't fix the problem. I've been in situations where there just was no operational expenditure to do all the work that was required to complete a remediation following a data migration program. And the solution was that IT had to come up and understand what was wrong. We had to develop the instructions for the business about how to fix it. But all the remediation had to be done in the front lines by the business, because they contained the operational resources that were paid for, that had the means and the time and the wherewithal to actually make the changes. So it can be small, or it can be really large, depending on the context of the situation.
Okay, anything more to add to this, Anne-Marie?
No, I think that's well covered. Thanks, Hayden.
Good stuff. Okay, on to question number 5 to you, Anne-Marie, also known as Addy. Is it better to use embedded reporting or create a data warehouse? And I guess this is, most packaged solutions come these days with the ability to dashboard or reporting, have some basic embedded analytics capability. Which is fantastic, but sometimes may be a little bit limiting. When is it that you need to bust out of that, send it out to an external data structure and reporting capability?
Yeah, of course. And I guess the burning platform as to whether a customer might need a data warehouse or not really depends on the customer. So I guess I'll spend a few moments just articulating what I believe to be the difference between embedded reporting and data warehousing, and where it may become important for a customer to consider data warehousing. So standard reporting embedded, and I'll use ERP as an example here, Hayden. But typically the standard reporting will provide insights into the operational performance of an organization. That reporting is typically extracted from transactional data. Often built-in reporting will give a user a exact view of the business at a point in time from an operational perspective. However, it's typically not built to perform sophisticated analysis, encompassing data from across your ecosystem and from discrete, sometimes external sources. For organizations with really complex corporate structures or very complex IT ecosystems with disparate ancillary systems, a data warehousing can provide increased capability that in turn will help the organization collate, house, and protect data. The data warehouse will typically allow you to consolidate data from multiple data sources. It will then allow you to run the reporting from one connection. So this will give you a consolidated view of the business, helping senior users make informed decisions to build strategy. A data warehouse can offer a number of additional benefits to an organization. So by example, if they're changing systems or platforms, it will alleviate a number of challenges linked to data conversion and quality. For those organizations also legislated to retain a lot of historical data over a long period of time, that data warehouse will allow the organization to alleviate data load from their BAU systems, be that an ERP or other system of record, and house that data in an external system where you can still easily access and extract information when you need to. So I guess the answer to the question, Hayden, is very much depends on the needs of the organization and really depending on what it is that you're looking to do with the data that you have.
I guess establishing a data warehouse has a bit of a reputation of a rather large project and the expenses that come with that. So there's probably a scale of organisation factor in here as well. Jason, Mike, anything further to add in here in terms of what you see with working with clients? Embedded reporting, is it always working in the data warehouse? What do you see out there?
I think I'd rather change the term to say it's always better to put as much of the logic as you can into the data rather than the reporting technology. Because the data you get to keep. You can change the veneer with reporting technology over and over. There's a really great example I always like to say, and I think it's a great time to say it now. In previous roles, I've been charged with doing migrations from one reporting technology to another. And a few times that I find that hugely valuable. When you have most of the time, like in big enterprise, when somebody wants to change reporting systems, it's because they think they want to consolidate the technology licenses. And that's great. I think the easiest and best time to do that is whenever you have a change of leadership. Because typically the leadership says, oh, we used to have these kind of KPIs, or we had these kind of colors, now we want these KPIs and these colors. If you do a migration of the exact same report to the new report, that's going to be operational expenditure, so you're not going to make a lot of money on it. But if you actually switch the entire reporting solution, their data, the reporting logic, and the technology, when you're changing over leadership, because you've got to change the entire reporting paradigm, you can capitalize a lot of that. And that will then add value to the company rather than just being a cost. So that's very important. But if the data, if all the logic was embedded in the reporting technology, and then you change the reporting technology, you've just lost all of that investment. So trying to push that logic down to the data layers is smart. Whether it's a data warehouse, data mart, data lake, doesn't matter. But try to get that reporting logic down out of the reporting layer.
I didn't expect it today, and I'm not sure how many accountants there are in the audience, but some of your thinking around CapEx versus OpEx is interesting.
You got to pay for it somehow. And for those who are on the call who know what I'm talking about, it's not easy when you got limited budget and you have to do magic. So understanding very clearly about data and financing is very important.
Yeah, and I guess we haven't really covered it specifically in a question, so let's jump into it now. And actually, just as an aside, I've seen a couple of questions coming in Q&A, but audience, please bring your questions in. We'll have time for Q&A at the end, so fire away now. In the context, I'll check what is there, but if you do have questions, get them in. So, we talk about data coming onto the balance sheet, and increasingly that's an issue in specific line items. How does that even achieved? I guess you're saying there's an aggregation of the effort that you put into your data projects that you performed over time. You've done them as capex versus opex, and therefore they're reflected on the balance sheet.
I think a lot of this is going to reflect on the different maturity of the organization. It doesn't necessarily mean that the larger organizations are more mature than the smaller ones. In my consulting with analytics, say I'm coming across smaller SMB customers who are far more advanced than some of the large enterprise customers in capitalizing their internal IT work. And they're actually advancing quite far in how sophisticated they're getting. So that's leverage maturity, I don't think is necessarily one-on-one with the size of an organization. What I can tell you though, in larger projects, typically when you go to a business case approval, when you're having to do the cost items, if you've got a mature finance department, you're going to know a lot about treatment of the different cost items. And when you're processing your project management time versus your training time, you're trying to acquire technology with subscriptions versus licenses. You're trying to package a post-training or consulting into this thing. You got a lot of in-house time versus external time. You want to capitalize as much of that as you can, but when a lot of it gets categorized and they say, well, what are they doing? Well, if you're just moving data from one place to another, you're not adding value. If you're just taking data and changing its qualities, you're not actually adding value, and they're not going to let you capitalize that. That means it's just a cost off your operational expenditure. That means your fixed term employees, your FTEs, and that's a high cost. A lot of times companies want to bring that down because it looks much better on the end of the annual report and balance books when you got that FTE minimized and you got capitalization maximized.
Mike, is that something you're seeing kind of in your New Zealand context?
Yeah, I think more often people are looking at what they can capitalize and if they can bundle it together. I think it depends on the accounting rules of the organization in question and how flexible they are about thinking about new things, because traditionally something like that wouldn't be capitalized. I think the other move is people, and a lot of it's driven by white papers, et cetera, about people thinking about, should I put a balance sheet item, literally like call my data an asset on my balance sheet? And I think that's a slippery slope, because actually data has literally zero value. What you do with the data has value, but the data itself has very little intrinsic value.
Well, if goodwill can be there, then surely my
Yeah, that's right. So
there,
you can you can write a number in there, and it's probably, well, it'll be right. It might be something you can talk about. But yeah, like the art of doing that is quite difficult. And there are some organizations that sort of specialize in trying to value intangible assets. But that's it's definitely not a science. It's more of an art.
Okay, Simon's question that came in is specific to this one, so I'll pose it now. And we sort of danced around it, and he's, just in terms of estimating organizational scale or the number of data sources that push an organization towards establishing the data warehouse in the first place versus running embedded analytics. I guess just a little bit of, from your experience, what you've seen, Mike, Jason, Anne-Marie, either.
I mean, I do quite a bit of this type of consulting, and I think for me, there's four separate bits, and I guess it touches a little bit on one of the questions that's coming up. But you've got, if you're talking about a data warehouse, everybody's got to realize that it's hard to get the data in. It's easy to take it out, right? Because in order to get it in properly, you need to understand the relationships. If you're going to make it a proper data warehouse, which is driving like operational or financial or regulatory reporting, all that data is going to have to be validated as well. And it tends to be the long tail of dirty data that's quite difficult to validate. So like 50% of the work might be in the last 3% of the data. And so that's kind of why a lot of the time when you look at an IT project to build a data warehouse, it seems very intimidating. And typically everybody says, we need to get all the data in the data warehouse. I take a much different view to that. You put the data that you're going to use frequently in the data warehouse. And so I think sometimes organizations KPI themselves on like, did we build the data model, or did we put those systems in the ERP and or in the data warehouse rather? And I layer over another metric, which is usage. So if you've built a part of the data warehouse that nobody's actually using or accessing or getting any value from, then why did you do it? So I think if a business can clearly say, these are the kinds of data that we use over and over, and it's therefore useful for us, valuable for us to put that data in there in a validated way that's business blessed or gold standard, whatever you want to call it, that's good. But if there isn't that kind of clear line to value, don't do it.
Yeah,
I guess.
I'd like to add to that. I think I agree with Michael on that. It's particularly about utilization. It's very, very important. I think it'd be wise before when somebody's embarking on even a small data mart that they think might evolve to a data warehouse, they're doing a data reporting. I think it's worth taking a step back and just doing a data strategy. And there is a wonderful paper by Harvard Business Review which talks about what is your data strategy, and they talk about the differences between an offensive or defensive strategy, or what you use to steer the business versus to operate the business. And if you start to tag your different departments to these kind of quadrant concepts, you start to get a feel for certain departments need to move much more agile with more degrees of agility or the intercompany data sharing, which means that puts on different constraints for how fast you can bring the data in or how fast you can make it available to other people within the company. Groups like finance, which are there, it's very much to operate the business, but it's there to operate and defend the business in many respects. They need very, very good, strong lineage. They need to have it traceable. It needs to be auditable. That kind of stuff is going to be slower to get in and slower to create. But marketing, they don't care. They just want to know what's good enough so I can send out the mail, get the most number of users. So there's a different context of the speed for which different types of departments might need their data or to qualify its accuracy. So doing a data strategy to plot this out so you can have reasonable expectations, but also not trying to kill yourself. I've seen data warehouse programs fail because simultaneously they're trying to serve both marketing and finance. And then in the end, they only had a small subset of finance happy, and then they had to write off the entire program because business and marketing and sales went off and built their own thing separately to the entire project. So data strategy is very, very important before embarking.
I guess it's an element also, Mike, going back to your point, just where you have a proven use case, the data is valuable, the business is using it, but the speed with which it's able to be produced is the constraint. So you want to make that whole thing go faster. That's got to be a driver in terms of answering Simon's question. I don't know if there's anything more to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, I find that sometimes data warehousing doesn't speed up access to data because there's a whole lot of processes that need to happen, and actually the data is slower to get to the end user. So to Jason's point, it sort of depends on what the use case is. Most of the use case around data warehousing is reliability, validity, solid numbers that you can count on rather than speed. Unless there's information that's locked away somewhere that nobody can get at. And I would argue that's not really something that should go to a data warehousing project off the bat. There's quite a few steps before deciding to put it in the data warehouse. Like, did we get value out of this when we just yanked it out and tried to do something? Like, that's a good first thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Simon, hopefully that's given you some material to work with. And next question then, Mike, and you alluded to it, but external and unstructured data, how best to bring that into the picture?
Yeah, look, I think based on what I've said before, it won't be a surprise, but I think there's kind of two types of external data that you deal with. One is kind of stuff that isn't generated by your business, but you might find useful. That could be things like census data or weather data or even another company's data a customer list that you're trying to merge with your customer list, that kind of thing. And I think you can spend a lot of time investigating the external data and trying to create a place to put it and hopefully use it. But I think it should be driven by use cases. So when you clearly say there's value that's going to be created by adding census data because we can do a better job of predictive modeling or customer profiling or whatever, then that's good. If you say we need weather data because we want to understand the impact of weather on our sales patterns or our call center patterns or whatever it is, that's valuable. And then the next thing you need to do is understand, when you get that data, are there any limitations on its use? So oftentimes when companies exchange data for some reason, there's it might be quite specific what the use is for that data. You might have to delete it after a certain period. It might have to stay within certain bounds. So you need, from a data governance point of view, if we sort of go back to the topic of the webinar, you need to be able to set those things up so that you have a clear way to keep your employees and yourself safe when you do that. And so some data will have no restrictions, some data will have lots of restrictions you need to understand. And then the other kind of external data is often data that comes in the form of like an acquisition or a new system or like that you've added. And so like if you all of a sudden add an email deployment engine, you're going to get contact response history, or if you buy a company, you're going to get a bunch of financing and invoice data, and you're kind of going to go, okay, well, we did some due diligence, but what do we actually have? And from my point of view, the first thing to do is don't worry about systems integration first of all. Worry about data integration. So can we pull this data out? Can we understand what's in it? What does it look like? And then sort of start blending it with your data to understand how it compares. And that's going to turn up a whole bunch of discrepancies and things, like as in this doesn't map to that and they don't do that the same way we do and all that kind of stuff. But if you can navigate through that and understand what's the valuable data out of what we're getting, then you can get value from that data while you're working out your longer term, more permanent systems integration. And in fact, the work that you do in that data integration is not lost at all, because that essentially becomes the specification for a lot of the systems integration. Because all those people who are thinking, oh, how do we integrate these systems? There's going to be all these nightmares. They can actually look at the data integration work and say, okay, well, it's not a nightmare for 85% of it, but this 15% is really ugly and we're going to have to break the back of it. From an unstructured data point of view, I mean, we might have a different approach than everyone sort of is the flavor nowadays, but for unstructured data, our advice is just get it, store it as cheaply as possible. So that might be chuck it in the cloud, get a commodity, like just go down to the local hardware store and buy some servers, chuck them under your desk, whatever you've got to do, right? But a lot of organizations get caught up in building these really large IT systems to store this unstructured data, but they don't know if it's going to provide them value. We get calls all the time from people. I've got all this data, like, how can I use it? Well, like, why do you have it? Figure out what might be useful. Or if you're not going to do that, if you're going to grab the data, great. Stick it in the cheapest, dirtiest, thing possible. And then you get the analysts and the business users to start interrogating that data. So when I talked before about data warehouses hard to get it in, easy to take it out, unstructured data opposite. Easy to put it in, harder to get it out. You got to figure out what are the things in there that you can actually use. And then once you do, then you brief the data warehouse team or the data mart team or the whoever team to go, look, this is stuff that we all actually want to use. Let's, on a more permanent basis, let's take it out of there and getting it in, better access and more validity.
I guess tools these days, we're getting better in natural language processing around unstructured data, where search terms can go away and find those documents that relate to the question you're trying to answer. So there must be a lot of value being added in those, with those technical capabilities to try and extract some value out of this stuff. So you validate the IT managers burrowing away of data for the last 10 years in terms of now I can actually see what he's buried away and do some proper search terms over it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think though that there's more noise and hype around that than there is value being created. because those tools and processes are still developing in their sophistication. And there's no question that at some point that's going to be a tipping where you can just point it at something and say go, and it's going to give you a bunch of really useful stuff. But it's still quite hydraulic. Like, you need an expert who understands NLP, or like a team of data scientists to really know what the outputs and what the biases are going to be and all that kind of stuff to get real information that's going to be valuable for you to, like, can you do it? Can you tick the box and say, yeah, we pointed this at this and it came out with this stuff? Yeah. But getting the value from it is sort of a much different question.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, Emery, anything more to add in this spot?
I do. If Anne-Marie doesn't. I wanted to comment that sometimes some unstructured files are quite sensitive. They might be audio recordings of conversations with customers. They might be image files with people's pictures or sensitive information. Well, I think in the data world, I do agree with Mike that getting a lot of the stuff, you want to try to store it as cheaply as possible. In some cases, that still needs to be done in a governed way with good security. The new approaches with data lakes and data warehouses, or data lakes beside data warehouses, I think are really excellent for these purposes. And now when I'm consulting to clients, I often get them to think the separation of information management from data management from file management. So when I take a look at external data that's been sourced or an unstructured data that's sourced, I think of this first and foremost as a file as opposed to data, and think that you want to make sure you do file management so you have the right restrictions and accesses to that file before you then start to even tap the data that's within it. So those kind of things are probably quite important if you're doing anything sensitive. But I also agree with Mike about having purpose for some of this stuff. I've seen some organizations that just say, let's grab everything, archive nothing, store it all because it's so cheap, and just put it in Hadoop, and that's all great. But then you create so much noise that the good data that somebody needs really quickly gets just marginalized beside this just heap of stuff that you've just thrown in there. So I think it's wise to think about a partitioning strategy, particularly in your file management methodology. Lastly, I think project-based approach to leading the curation of unstructured external data is really wise. You want to have an executive sponsor. Who's paying for this? Who's saying that they want this external data? What exec is putting their name up to it? Just like you have an exec sponsor for the entire business intelligence or data warehouse or data lake program, you need a sponsor for the data source. You need a sponsor for that unstructured data.
All right, bang on. Good stuff, guys. Next one up, Anne-Marie. This one under your remit in terms of how security should be handled in the context of good data governance.
Yeah, thanks, Hayden. This is such a broad subject. I guess in the era of big data and high volume, very broad, wide variety and high velocity data, organizations must be more focused on improving their security cadence around, managing that data. Many risks organizations are exposed to today in the modern era, spanning from cyber attacks to risks that their own users may leak data inadvertently. So I guess, the challenge for organizations today is the need to balance, making data readily available and accessible with the security that's required to wrap around that. Accuracy, reliability, and performance of data is really important for organizations to be able to have a competitive advantage. However, if this data is poor, unsecured, or unavailable, even the most thorough analysis will not improve the bottom line for those organizations. I guess today, in a highly distributed, complex world where data spans multiple servers, applications, and systems, infrastructure security is really critical, as is the governance that will be wrapped around, the internal permissions to ensure good governance rigor is deployed. An end-to-end security strategy, I guess, is a starting point. And that extends much beyond the considerations around the database that the data is stored on. The entire environment needs to be considered, from extracting data from operational auxiliary systems, moving data, exchanging data, if you are utilizing a warehouse, and distributing the data to all of the various sources, be it systems or people. So I guess some of the things that are really important, for a customer to consider, your user access rights, have they been determined? Are they documented? Are they based on roles? Are administrators and super users carefully controlled and audited? Is your supporting database appropriately configured and hardened to ensure that you've maximized security? Have you restricted access according to the sensitivity of the data? Are you monitoring your strategy to ensure that it's up to date with the changes in your business and you're looking to continually improve that? And, are we auditing? So are we looking retrospectively into the business to ensure that the governance and the cadence around security is being enforced? So very, very broad subject, Hayden, but I guess they would be some of the initial areas that we would look to focus on here.
Yeah, well done covering it off. I was going to say it's probably the short straw in the questions for today. So you've done a good job of covering it off. Just to the audience, a couple more questions to come. Q&A at the end, so get your questions in, click on the Q&A button, fire away. Jason, Mike, anything to add into this rather broad issue of security and data?
No, not more than what I commented earlier, that depends on the organization and being really clear about the roles and responsibilities about it.
It's definitely part of a data governance strategy, though, is security needs to be, as Anne-Marie has outlined, there's lots of aspects that need to be included within there. Okay, question 8. He turns his page over without turning the slide over. Change management within this environment, Mike, and a lot of this, I guess, is around IT change and how IT might approach introducing change out of projects. Is it the same agile world as we're hearing so much about? Does that apply in the data management field?
Well, I think agile is a whole nother question. We could probably do another webinar on that one. But as far as managing the change, I think it's important to realize, I personally think it's important to realize that when you're changing data governance rules or when you're trying to institute new ones, that it actually involves quite a wide variety of stakeholders. Jason was talking earlier about maybe you're putting the responsibility for sorting out some issues on the front line, or maybe you're trying to manage it in the back end. And if you're putting responsibility on the front line, which is 100% a good thing to do, because they're the ones ultimately that are using and getting benefit from the data, they also need to understand sort of what they're up for when they're doing that. Like, what are the dangers of having this information? Or I don't want to make it sound all threatening and dark, because it's not, but it's just, what's a responsible approach so that they can feel comfortable doing it in a way that's not going to get them into trouble or anybody else into trouble. I think the main thing is people are, going to have to adapt to new ways of doing things, because anytime you're trying to push data governance, it's usually because you're pushing the data agenda, and that usually means you're trying to do something different, whether it's improve the business or optimize the business or whatever. So there's always a balance between that freedom that's enabled by more data capability and the risk appetite the organization might have for doing that, and the governance policies that are in place. Personally, we see the best route to success by forming some guiding principles that are very simple, that people can understand, and then they can judge anything they're doing or any policy against those principles. So a good example would be, we believe in the right kind of safe. And it's a principle. And so what does that do? Like, why is that good? Well, because everybody can understand one kind of safe isn't the same for everyone in all the situations, and marketing might have a different kind of safe than finance, and et cetera. And it also allows you to judge your policies against that. So if you're looking at all the different IT policies or governance policies or data use policies, you can say, well, is this the right kind of safe given the kind of information we're working with, the kind of data we're working with, what might happen, what's the uses of it, would we be on the front paper if this was released, all that kind of stuff. And if you implement that in a good, smart way, then those guiding principles can be something that everybody can hold to and talk about and even stick up for. Like they can say, hey, that's not the right kind of safe in this situation. You're not realizing the kind of risk, or you're being way too hard on us because that risk doesn't exist, whatever it is. But unless you have those very simple principles, I think people switch off because it gets buried in like a lot of legal terms and a lot of hefty, difficult governance documents. And like, when's the last time you read Apple's terms and conditions, mate? Like, seriously, isn't it like a squillion pages long? Like, there's no way. So, give somebody something they can engage with to change.
Lime scooters that were in the
Yeah, well, there's plenty of examples of that.
Absolutely. Jason, what's your perspective?
I love Mike's safe analogy, and I think it's a great one. I do want to comment a little bit because we're carrying on a bit on security, and I'll go into the agile, but I did want to talk a little bit more. The safe analogy that Mike has given is an excellent one. I was at a security conference in Chicago once, and there was a great analogy explained to me. It said, Jason, if you have a house or a home, you have different security barriers. You have the front door, and they got to get past the front door guard, and then if they got to get up the elevator, and they do the swipe card, and they get to the key to the apartment. And then they can get into your apartment, and you have things maybe about in your living room, maybe some things you maybe put and hide away in a drawer, maybe some things you put into the safe. And you think about barriers or lines of defense. And then in an organization, Mike is giving the analogy, different departments have their safe. In big enterprises, there's a concept called critical data, or the crown jewels. If this data got out, it could jeopardize the operations of the business if somebody got a hold of it. It's like that critical. Then you might think, well, do you want that critical data diversely stored in different levels of safes around the organization, or do you want to have a central safe that has a certain level of qualities about it that you can put those crown jewels in there? So I love the analogy. So Mike, thank you for raising that. On Agile, it's funny. My first job was with SAS Institute, tech support and consulting. And SAS, they always did iterative development. This was way before anybody had the word Agile coming out. Agile came out. It really is a fast way to develop front-end systems. And the dual program, extreme Agile, all these things came about. And you can have people who are just so strict about the Agile with their Kanban walls and their Scrum masters, and they've created all sorts of processes that become so difficult, you have to adopt it. Same thing with the waterfall. Waterfall became so complex, sometimes you have to adopt it. But the iterative development of data is still there, regardless if it's waterfall or if it's an Agile process. People just wrap up all sorts of complexities, I guess, so they can understand it or have their jobs understood. And I get that. There are extreme parameters on both. For the data governance aspect with Agile, it depends. If you're setting up infrastructure for the first time, I recommend you have a waterfall approach when you're setting up infrastructures. And when you implement things into production, I recommend waterfalls. But when you're trying to iterate data very, very fast and trying to develop that work product and trying to really move those sprints through, then Agile. So I recommend people think about what it is they're trying to do and adopt the best methods for what's trying to be achieved. Just because somebody says you must do waterfall or must be extreme Agile doesn't mean that's right for you. So think about what you're trying to do and adopt the methods that make sense for you.
All right, good stuff. Okay, moving on to the last question. Just as we're running out of time, it's slightly flippant, but you've done the fantastic data governance. Obviously, your analytics is going to be fantastic, and the business is going to be ecstatic. Jason.
If data is well governed, is analysis easy? I'm going to say not necessarily, because a chief data officer's goals are going to be very different to a chief analytic officer's. A chief data officer who will probably have data governance, their goals are to try to support both analytical business objectives as well as operational business objectives. Whereas a chief analytic officer is going to be there to support business objectives, particularly business initiatives and projects. So that doesn't necessarily make it easy. It certainly will help. And when you have goals aligned across the CDO and the CAO, that certainly helps. But you got to get the goals aligned and agreed where their shared goals are, and then those teams need to work together to achieve that. As far as what makes analysis easy, the better the data is prepared, the better it's going to be. But what I did want to comment is that artificial intelligence is being used both in analytics and in data preparation these days, and there's a lot of advances on both sides. In analytics, I think the thing that's making analytics the easiest, and I've always been a huge proponent for what I call analytics for the masses. Everybody should be able to do it if they want to. It's got to be easy. But I love the new things that's out today where it says, hey, you just did this graph. An analyst like you who does graphs like this is probably also interested in these graphs. And it just gives you a whole bunch of extra graphs and tables and queries because it thinks you'll need them. And as you start to use it, it learns and adapts to you and starts making you more efficient as an analyst. So for every one query, you might get 10. So you get a tenfold return on your effort. So those kind of things are actually making analytics easier. And in data transformation, we're using a lot of AI now and scrubbing and data profiling. That's certainly making things easier as well.
All right, fantastic. We are top of the hour, so I will move to wrap things up. I need to give thanks. We'll zoom through Q&A because our audience has been satisfied with such outstanding responses from the panel. And I actually had a few questions, but you guys have answered them as well, so maybe they had the same thing. Do need to say thank you to Sage, who sponsored our session today. Thank you to you, Anne-Marie, for liaising on that one. Sage, if you don't know, a global software company. They have a comprehensive set of solutions for business management across all types of business, from small business to large enterprise. Specifically around today's content, their enterprise management solution used to be called X3, that probably the audience is more familiar with, has a data and analytics module that can be embedded within the solution. Essentially provides and makes, eliminates a lot of the issues we've talked about today, in that you have the best of both worlds, if you will, embedded analytic capability, but also a data warehouse that's been configured specifically to the Sage data environment that you're operating within. So get in touch with Anne-Marie next pane. Thank you to the panelists, but Anne-Marie can put you in touch with the right people if you want to see a demo of that solution. So thank you to Sage. Sage will also be in touch after the session. They have an ebook around making better use of your data, which has got the 3 common challenges of information overload. So some solutions to work in there. So look for that in your inbox. Thank you very much to panelists today, Jason, Mike, and Marie, and the invisible Addy. Great to have your contributions, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. There will be a follow-up with the recording in it to the audience. Thank you for your attendance today. And you'll see us in your inbox in the not too distant future with upcoming events. Thanks very much, everyone. Bring it to a close.
Thank you.